Welcome, everybody. Today is the Torah portion, Vayechi, and this is week 12, and it's talking about Jacob's life, and it's titled, He Lived. Now, Jacob's life had not been an easy one. His father Isaac passes away. His brother Esau desired to kill him. Jacob left and served Laban for 20 years, working as a shepherd, and raised his own large family and his flocks. When he left Laban, he stressed over the encounter with Esau because, as I shared, when he left Esau, Esau desired to kill him. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, dies, who must have been like a second mom to Jacob. His beloved wife dies, giving birth to Benjamin. He had dealt with Dinah's traumatic event and the subsequent revenge taken by Levi and Shimon. His firstborn son, Joseph, by Rachel, the love of his life, is presumed dead after he had just joyously bestowed him with a prestigious coat at age 17. Jacob grieved for 23 years. Can you imagine? He had an obvious grieving process about him. He was changed. He was almost like the life was sucked out of him. And so he grieved for 23 years over Joseph when being deceived by 10 of his sons. Now the drought had taken its toll. The circumstances to obtain grain from Egypt left him on pins and needles as his 10 sons left him on their second journey. And on this second journey, they took Benjamin, while Shimon was already being held in Egypt from their first journey. So after these bizarre yet divine turn of events, Jacob is reunited with Joseph in Egypt. That is why we have to trust Yahweh no matter what, because even in times of tribulation, he is with us. He will never leave us or forsake us. And Jacob never even thought he would ever see Joseph again, yet Yahweh blessed him abundantly. Not only was he reunited with Joseph, but he also was able to see Joseph's sons. Today, the Bible study begins in Genesis 47, verse 28. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. And the time for Israel to die drew near. And he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Now, if I have found favor in your eyes, please put your hand under my thigh and show loving commitment and truth to me. Please do not bury me in Mitzrayim, but I shall lie with my fathers, and you shall take me up out of Mitzrayim, Egypt, and bury me in their burial place." And he said, "I do as you have said." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him, and Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. Through all of the ups and downs, Jacob was greatly blessed, for Yahweh was with him. And Joseph makes a covenant with Jacob that he would bury his father where he had requested. Now, Jacob lived 147 years, and his years had been less than Isaac and Abraham's. Isaac, his father, had lived 180 years, and Abraham, his grandfather, had lived to be 175 years. The place where his fathers had been buried was in the cave at Machpelah in Hebron. We read about that in Genesis 25, verse 10. Abraham purchased both the field and the cave in Machpelah near Mamre. Now that was very important to do. was to purchase both the field and the cave in Machpelah. And we will see why that was extremely important. Remember, he bought it from the Hittites, and they offered to give Abraham the land, but he said, no, 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 I want to purchase the field and the cave. Extremely important. There is also buried Sarah, and then later Abraham was also buried there. And in Genesis 47, 29 through 30, we see Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob are buried there. And in Genesis 49, we will see Leah is buried there. And many years later, Moses would bring Joseph's bones out of Egypt during the first Exodus, and Joshua would be the one to bury Joseph's bone in Shechem. So that is recorded in Joshua 24:32. Joshua buried the bones of Joseph, which the sons of Israel brought up from Egypt at Shechem. Now, thousands of years later, Yahusha would travel through Samaria called Shechem. We read about that in John chapter 4. So when the master knew that the Pharisees had heard that Yahusha made and immersed more taught ones than John, although Yahusha himself did not immerse, but his taught ones, he left Judah and went away again to Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria called Shechem, near the piece of land Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's fountain was there. So Yahusha, being wearied from the journey, was sitting thus at the fountain. It was about the 6th hour, or noon. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Yahusha said to her, "Give me to drink." For his taught ones had gone off into the city to buy food. The woman of Samaria therefore said to him, "How is it that you, being a Yehudi, or a Jew, ask a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For the Yehudim do not associate with Samaritans." Yahusha answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of Elohim and who it is who says to you, "Give me to drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, "Master, you have no vessel, and the well is deep. From where then do you have living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself and his sons and his cattle?" Needless to say, the people of Shechem drank living water that day. All the people in the land were affected by the severe drought. And in our day, there is a drought for the living word of Elohim. And people may ask, well, how can that be? There is a church on every corner. Yes, but Yahweh's people perish for lack of knowledge. They feed on the genetically modified and blended doctrines of men as they hunger and thirst for righteousness. They do not rightly divide his word. Now, in the days of Joseph, when the people ran out of silver to purchase grain during the drought, they then traded their livestock for grain. As the drought persisted, they asked Joseph to purchase their land, and they would work as servants to Pharaoh. Therefore, Joseph purchased all the land in Egypt, except for the priests and princes. I read in a commentary that the land of Egypt was divided into 3 parts at that time. 1/3 was what Pharaoh owned, which included Goshen. 1/3 belonged to the people, and 1/3 the priests. One can easily see how those in rulership can take over a country due to such a catastrophic event as a famine. Later, we read, after the people had sold everything, they were moved into cities farmed the land, and gave 1/5 to Pharaoh. Priests of the land were excluded by law. And of course, we know in Goshen, Jacob's family was provided for, and they were fruitful and they multiplied. Joseph does keep his promise to his father, Jacob, Israel. We will soon read of the magnificent funeral procession from Goshen to Machpelah in Genesis 50. One of the commentators stated it was approximately 300 miles. So this was a very long, elaborate journey. 39 years had elapsed. The youth of 17 had become a man of 56. The boy slave had now become a very prestigious prince. Both were occasions, though, of grief. At 17, he left his father through the treachery of his brothers. Now he would be burying his father with his brothers all around him. As we know, Joseph was a type and shadow of Yahusha. Likewise, Yahusha has covenanted with us that he will not leave our spirit, soul, or our bones in our so-called Egypt, better known today as Mystery Babylon. In Genesis 48, we read, and after these events, it came to be that it was said to Joseph, see, your father is sick. And he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob was told, see, your son Joseph is coming to you. And Israel strengthened himself and sat up on the bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me and said to me, see, I am making you fruitful and shall increase you and make of you an assembly of peoples and give this land to your seed after you as an everlasting possession. And now your 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Shimon, they are mine. Your offspring, whom you shall bring forth after them, are yours. And let them be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. And I, when I came from Padan, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, who are these? And Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom Elohim has given me in this place. And he said, please bring them to me and let me bless them. And the eyes of Israel were dim with age, and he was unable to see. And he drew them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face, but see, Elohim has also shown me your seed. He was greatly blessed, greatly blessed. So in Genesis chapter 48 and 49, the last days of Jacob's life are recorded. Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel, has become ill, and Joseph goes to his side and brings his 2 sons. Jacob blesses both Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob recounts how Yahweh appeared and blessed him at the city of Luz. Now, Luz is defined as almond tree, the early name of Bethel, and probably the name of the town in close proximity to the actual location of the altar and pillar of Jacob. So Jacob had changed the name of that city of Bethel, house of El. And later in Genesis 48, we will see Jacob passes on the covenant promise given to Abraham to the next generation. And we will read the prophetic words spoken over each of his sons, and not only to his sons, but to us. Now, Jacob Israel made a very important point in verse 5 and 6. He states that Ephraim and Manasseh are his, like Reuben and Shimon are his. So what does that mean exactly? Reuben and Shimon were Jacob's first two sons with his union with Leah. So this emphasizes that their favor would be as the firstborn position and the secondborn position. The birthright position, we know, would be Joseph's, and the ruler would arise through Judah. The future children Joseph would have would be Joseph's. We see a beautiful grafting in or adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh into Israel. They represented the future mixed multitude that by grace through faith would be recognized as sons of Israel to this day. Us. Ephraim and Manasseh were to receive the patriarchal name and inheritance of Israel. At age 147, Yahweh continued to fulfill the promise given to Abraham, and he greatly blessed Jacob in doing so. It is recorded in Ezekiel 47, verse 22 and 23. And it shall be that you divide it by lot as an inheritance for yourselves and for the strangers who sojourn in your midst and who bear children among you. And they shall be to you as native born among the children of Israel. With you, they have an inheritance in the midst of the tribes of Israel. And it shall be that in whatever tribe the stranger sojourns, there you give him his inheritance, declares the Master Yahweh. I mean, I believe we have all wondered what tribe we are going to be part of, but that remains to be seen. So we have something to look forward to see where we end up, where we will be gathered. We read Paul's words about the nations grafted in Romans chapter 11 through 24. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Let it not be. But by their fall, deliverance has come to the nations to provoke them to jealousy. So Yahweh was using their fall for good. In Deuteronomy 32:21, they made me jealous by what is not El. They provoked me with their worthless matters, but I make them jealous by those who are no people. I provoke them with a foolish nation. For the most part, Israel proved to be a disobedient people. It had only been a few months out of Egypt when they would whore with the sin of the golden calf. This disobedience would continue throughout the generations, but through it all, Yahweh would preserve his righteous line, his crimson thread, royally woven through Genesis to Revelation. So we continue in verse 12. And if their fall is riches for the world, and their failure riches for the nations, how much more their completeness? For I speak to you, the nations, inasmuch as I am an emissary to the nations, I esteem my service. If somehow I might provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh and save some of them. So this little graphic to the side shows ethnic Israel and the nation people and how all must come through the door Yahushua HaMashiach to become part of Israel, the ecclesia, his congregation. Those born from above are true Israel. And because of the fall from the natural branches, which are the brown part, some were unbelieving and they were broken off. And this is what Paul is talking about, and how Yahweh used all of that for good for the nation people, the wild olive tree, that he grafts in the branches to the natural branches. So the natural branches are the brown and the wild olive tree branches are the tan that are grafted in. So, for I speak to you, the nations, inasmuch as I am an emissary to the nations, I esteem my service. If somehow, I mean, Paul's heart was for his people, his brethren. If somehow I might provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh and save some of them. For if their casting away is the restoration to favor of the world, what is their acceptance but life from the dead? Now, if the first fruit is set apart, the lump is also. And if the root is set apart, so are the branches. And if some of the branches were broken off, like demonstrated here in this little graphic, these were the natural branches broken off of the unbelieving Israelites. And if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree over here, having been grafted in among them here, and came to share the root and fatness of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. And if you boast, remember, you do not bear the root, but the root bears you. And you shall say then, the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Good. By unbelief, they were broken off, and you stand by belief. Do not be arrogant, but fear. For if Elohim did not spare the natural branches, he might not spare you either. That's something to ponder. Once saved, always saved? If Elohim did not spare the natural branches, he might not spare you either. See then the kindness and sharpness of Elohim. See, Elohim will work in either mode. He can be full of kindness, but he can also be sharp. And on those who fell sharpness, but toward you kindness, if you continue in his kindness, otherwise you also shall be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in unbelief, shall be grafted in, for Elohim is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these who are the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? We continue in Genesis 48. So Joseph brought them from between his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. So in doing so, Joseph thought he was positioning them correctly for his father to bless them. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, consciously directing his hands. So he crossed over. We have that crossing over principle. The first will be last and the last will be first principle, of which Jacob was very familiar with, was he not? For Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, the Elohim before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the Elohim who has fed me all my life long to this day, the messenger who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the youths. I mean, look at that definition. He is validating and clarifying this Elohim, because even back in his day, there were many Elohim that people worshiped in the nations, but they weren't worshiping the true Elohim. So he makes it very clear that Elohim before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked, because the covenant was made with Abraham, and the seed of Isaac passed through the flayed, circumcised flesh of Abraham, was conceived in Sarah, and with Isaac, the covenant would continue. Not Ishmael. Ishmael was also blessed and became a great people, but the covenant seed would come through Abraham and Isaac. So the Elohim before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked, the Elohim who has fed me all my life long to this day, the messenger who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the youths. And let my name be called upon them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them increase to a multitude in the midst of the earth. I thought it was interesting that the scriptures make it very clear that Israel's eyes had grown dim, very, very dim. And when he was first meeting Manasseh and Ephraim, he caressed them, he hugged them, he kissed them, he felt them. I wonder what else he felt about them. Because when you lose one sense, your other senses are increased. And Yah was directing Israel to know who the seed would continue on through. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it was evil in his eyes, and he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from the head of Ephraim to the head of Manasseh. And Joseph said to his father, no, not so. Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn, but put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also becomes a people, and he also is great, and yet his younger brother is greater than he, and his seed is to become the completeness of the nations. Just think about this. Not only was Joseph sent ahead of his family in not the best of circumstances, but Yahweh's plan unfold to save many, many people. But yet here we even see a greater aspect of why Joseph was sent to Egypt. When he had his two sons, this righteous line, the seed, would continue on through Ephraim to become the completeness of the nations. And he blessed them on that day, saying, in you, Israel shall bless, saying, Elohim make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said to Joseph, see, I am dying, but Elohim shall be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. And I have given to you one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. So Ephraim and Manasseh were blessed with the right to the name Israel, and thus connected to Israel's fathers, Abraham and Isaac. This holds true as we are Israel, the one new man, and our father is the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We too clarify who our father is, because the enemy counterfeits everything, absolutely everything. Yahusha is the Melchizedek. Even pagan nations had kings that they called Melchizedek. My king is righteous. And so everything is counterfeited. So we have to be mindful of that. But we know the true Melchizedek. Yahusha is the true vine. He is the Melchizedek, the ruler. And we are the body. We are the final remnant coalescing before Yahusha's return. This is an awesome point in time to be in. Challenging, yes, but many of the generations before us were also challenging. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 2, we read this last week, and I just want to re-emphasize it. As for the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was the firstborn, but because he profaned his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to the birthright, for Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph's. And also in Zechariah chapter 2, it says, and Yahweh shall inherit Judah, his portion in the set apart land, and he shall again choose Jerusalem. Hush, all flesh, before Yahweh, for he has roused himself out of his set apart dwelling. Salvation for the nations. Thus said Yahweh, guard right ruling and do righteousness, for near, very near, is my deliverance to come and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who becomes strong in it, guarding the Sabbath, lest he profane it, and guarding his hand from doing any evil. And let not the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying, Yahweh has certainly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, look, I am a dry tree. He don't want to hear that. For thus said Yahweh to the eunuchs who guard my Sabbaths and have chosen what pleases me and are holding on to my covenant, to them I shall give in my house and within my walls a place and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I give them an everlasting name that is not cut off. Also, the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahweh to serve him and to love the name of Yahweh, to be his servants, all who guard the Sabbath and not profane it and are holding on to my covenant, them I shall bring to my set apart mountain and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their ascending offerings and their slaughterings are accepted on my slaughter place, for my house is called a house of prayer for all the peoples. The Master Yahweh, who gathers the outcast of Israel, declares, I gather still others to him besides those who are gathered to him. So again, he said, the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahweh to serve him and to love the name of Yahweh, to be his servants, to guard the Shabbat and not profane it. And to do that, you need to know what day of the week is the Sabbath. And you also need to know his covenant. The new covenant, ratified, blood ratified with his precious blood. And a blood ratified covenant cannot be changed. It cannot be altered. It consists of a proposal. And to this day, he has proposed to the people. And those that he proposed to, they can accept or reject his proposal. We have accepted his proposal. And then he ratified that covenant that we entered into with his precious blood. And then we observed the covenant confirming meal of bread and wine and the washing of each other's feet, which is a priestly duty. And it shows, it testifies that we are in covenant with Yahushua HaMashiach. We have removed our sandals of authority in which we once walked in this world. We've removed our sandals and we've entered into the covenant with him to serve him. And it is no longer we that live any longer. It is he that lives in us and through us. We are not our own. We have been purchased with a great price. And we are to make all of our decisions based on the mind of Yahushua and fall in step with the will of the Father and carry out the fruit of the Spirit. Israel had several irresponsible leaders to this day. All you beasts of the field, come to devour all you beasts in the forest. His watchmen are blind, all of them, they have not known. All of them are dumb dogs, unable to bark, dreaming, lying down, loving to slumber. And the dogs have a strong appetite. They never have enough. And they are shepherds? They have not known understanding. All of them look to their own way. Have we not heard that? That's not what it means to us. Well, the people just wouldn't understand if we didn't observe Christmas. The people wouldn't understand if we didn't observe Easter. We are to serve him, to love his name, to be his servants, to guard his commandments. So all of them look to their own way, everyone for his own gain, from his own end, saying, come, let me bring wine and fill ourselves with strong drink. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow shall be as today, even much greater. And in Romans 11, for I do not wish you to be ignorant of this secret, brothers. And again, this is Paul speaking to the Romans, lest you should be wise in your own estimation, that hardening in part has come over Israel until the completeness of the nations has come in. And so all Israel shall be saved, as it has been written, the deliverer shall come out of Zion, he shall turn away wickedness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Truly, as regards the good news, they are enemies for your sake. But concerning the choice, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. For the gifts and the calling of Elohim are not to be repented of. For as you also at one time disobeyed Elohim, but now have obtained compassion through their disobedience, so also these have now disobeyed, that through the compassion shown you, they also might obtain compassion. For Elohim has shut them all up to disobedience in order to have compassion on all. So Elohim's plan is unfolding perfectly. Oh, the depth of riches and wisdom and knowledge of Elohim. How unsearchable his judgments and untraceable his ways. For who has known the mind of Yahweh? Or who has become his counselor? Or who first gave to him, and it shall be given back to him? Because of him and through him and to him are all, to whom be esteemed forever. In Genesis 49, we read, and Jacob called his sons and said, gather together so that I declare to you what is to befall you in the last days. Isn't that an interesting verse? Because he's gathering his sons to tell them what is to befall them in the last days. So this is speaking to us most certainly as well. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my power, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of exaltation and the excellency of power, boiling like water. You do not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So Reuben was Israel's firstborn through Leah. Shimon and Levi are brothers. Their weapons are implements of violence. Let my being not enter their council. Let my esteem not be united to their assembly, because they kill a man in their displeasure and they lame an ox in pleasure. Cursed be their displeasure, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So these qualities that Israel is reviewing are qualities that help us identify who we encounter at times. And Shimon and Levi were very cruel, very bloody. You, Judah, your brothers praise you. Your hand is on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey you have gone up, my son. He bowed down, he crouched like a lion, and like a lion, who does rouse him? The scepter shall not turn aside from Judah, nor an inscriber from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him is the obedient people, or is read, to him is the obedience of peoples. Matthew goes into that verse in greater detail in his teaching on Vayechi, 7th edition. Verse 11, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. So Judah was the fourth son of Leah. So we see in this chart here, it was Judah's union with Tamar, and she had twins, Perez and Zerah. So through that union came Perez, and Perez is in the genealogy chart leading to Yahusha, because Yahusha's stepfather was Joseph, and Joseph belonged to the tribe of Judah. But Yahusha's blood, bone, and flesh were from heaven. Now, we see that Judah had married a Canaanite wife. In our earlier studies, they had 3 sons, and Onan. And Onan died. And Tamar is promised by Judah to be given Shelah. And that never happens. So through Tamar's actions, the righteous lineage of Yahusha was maintained. The rod, the cord, and the seal preserved. So Judah had union with Tamar, not knowing that was Tamar, and the righteous lineage continued through Perez. In rabbinical literature, it says Tamar was the daughter of Shem. Now, in their day and age, they didn't use terms such as granddaughter and so forth, but Tamar very well could have been the granddaughter of Shem, the son of Noah. And in the book of Jasher, the extra biblical text in chapter 16, verse 11, and Adonai-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, the same was Shem, went out with his men to meet Abram and his people with bread and wine, and they remained together in the valley of Melech. So Shem, the Melchizedek of Genesis 14, there seems to be the connection to Tamar being Shem's granddaughter. So the Melchizedek of Genesis 14, even though there's differences of opinions here, is the type and shadow I see of the Melchizedek, Yahushua HaMashiach. And Yahusha was bound to the choice vine, YHWH, the Father. They are echad, they are one. They are the tree of life, which also means we are one in him. In Hebrews chapter 7, 1-3, it says, "For this Melchizedek, sovereign of Salem, priest of the Most High Elohim, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a 10th part of all, his name being translated, indeed first King of righteousness, and then also King of Salem, that is King of peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but having been made like the Son of Elohim, remains a priest for all time." Now, that has been discussed a great deal. What does that mean? Without father, without mother, without genealogy? And this is how I see that. I'm not saying I have this all figured out, but this is the perspective I see. It was only in the Aaronic Levitical priesthood that the mother and the father genealogy had to be validated. In the Melchizedek priesthood, we become his kingdom of priests by grace through faith. We do not have to validate any particular mother-father genealogy. Israel is defined by those that believe and have entered in through the door, Yahushua HaMashiach, the Melchizedek, the true vine. This is true Israel born from above. John 15, Yahushua said, "I am the true vine." So what does that imply? That implies that there's some other vines out there that are not the true vine. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Every branch in me that bears no fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, so that it bears more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Stay in me, and I stay in you. As the branch is unable to bear fruit of itself unless it stays in the vine, so neither you, unless you stay in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who stays in me and I in him, he bears much fruit, because without me, you are able to do naught. If anyone does not stay in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up. And they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you stay in me and my words stay in you, you shall ask whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. In this my Father is esteemed, that you bear much fruit, and you shall be my taught ones. As the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Stay in my love. If you guard my commands, you shall stay in my love, even as I have guarded my Father's commands and stay in his love, his covenant commands. Shiloh is spelled Sheen in the bottom left-hand corner. It's spelled Sheen, Lamed, Hey. Shiloh is Yahusha. It actually means to whom it belongs. It comes from the root shalah, Sheen, Lamed, Hey, spelled the same way, to be safe and secure and tranquil. Therefore, when the text says, until Shiloh comes, it more accurately reads, until to whom it belongs comes. Now, Shalah's name was actually Shiloh. And this is an excerpt taken from Torah to the Tribes Teaching, the 7th edition Vayechi with Matthew Nolan. So Shalah's name was actually Shiloh. Now, the Shalah's name he's speaking of here was Shalah, the son of Judah, with the last son of Judah with the Canaanite wife. Both words are from the same root word Shalah. Tamar was not given to Shalah. She wasn't. Tamar was not given to Shalah. Meaning the one in legal possession of the rod of rule, Tamar, cannot be given to a harlot mixture. Shalah's mother was a Canaanite, a cursed mix. Those that have the legal right to rule must be found Zaddik, more righteous than Judah, and not of a corrupted, mixed, spiritual pagan race. The rod must go to one who can bring forth the required pure seed. Tamar, who is more righteous, Torah, than Judah, and able to bring forth Perez, right here, and Perez would be the royal line leading to Mashiach from the tribe of Judah. The rod belongs to those who hold the testimony of Yahusha and keep his Torah. The Melchizedek remnant. Judah gave up the rod, the right to lead. I mean, he gave his cord, his rod, and his seal. He gave it to Tamar. He gave those crucial ruling elements to Tamar. So the rod belongs to those who hold the testimony of Yahusha and keep his Torah, the Melchizedek remnant. Judah gave up the rod, the right to lead. If we continue to cling to the doctrines of men, we'll lose our right to lead in the kingdom of Yahweh, and that right will go to them to whom it belongs, the Melchizedek remnant. We are Israel. Yahusha is the head. We are the body. We are one with him. So the question is, Or are we tied to the cursed fig tree of the man ordained, UN sanctioned Zionist Israel with the doctrines of men? Or are we tied to the true vine, the tree of life, Yahushua HaMashiach, Shiloh, the Melchizedek, who is the head of the one new man, Israel born from above, and we as the body? This makes us set apart people, his set apart people. It makes us his kingdom of priests from every tongue, tribe, people, and nation. And all must enter through the door, whether ethnic Israel or nation people, to become part of Israel born from above. All must enter through the door and be washed by the blood of the Lamb. We are then tied to him. We're tethered like a cord. His name is in our very DNA, and the DNA strands are very much like Jacob's ladder, the cord of connection. He has added the hay, the very breath of eternal life. Like Abram's name was changed to Abraham, and Sarai's name was changed to Sarah, the added hay, the breath of eternal life. Zebulun dwells at the seashore. He was a seafarer. Zebulun dwells at the seashore. He is for a haven for ships, and his border is unto Zidon. And he was the 10th son of Israel and came through Leah. And Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between two burdens. And he saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant. And he inclined his shoulder to bear a burden and became a subject to slave labor. So in essence, as we read about the proclamations made over Israel's sons, we get an idea of the possible tribes some that we encounter are in. Dan. I'm going to spend a little time on Dan. I think Dan sometimes gets a bad rap. And again, this is only my perspective. Dan rightly rules his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan is a serpent by the way, an adder by the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider falls backward. I have waited for your deliverance, O Yahweh. And Dan was the firstborn of Rachel's servant, Bilhah. In this excerpt I took from this website, and unfortunately this website is no longer active. I'm glad I copied some of the context or the content, excuse me. Dan was the 5th son of Jacob and the firstborn of Bilhah, Rachel's maid. It can be reasoned from several sources that Dan adopted 4, possibly 5 tribal emblems. For the purpose of this article, our concentration will center on the horse emblem. Israel, the father of Dan, remember Jacob's name was changed to Israel, passed on this blessing. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that bites the horse's heel, so that his rider shall fall backward. During their sojourn in the wilderness, the tribes were instructed to camp by the ensigns or the banners of their father's house. I mean, there were 12 banners, and then there were 4 lead banners. So this is talking about the 12 banners. During their sojourn in the wilderness, the tribes were instructed to camp by the banners of their father's house. Considering his father's blessing, Dan was entitled to use a serpent, horse, or even scales, symbolizing judgment on his standard. However, Moses's blessing to Dan before his death stated, Dan is a lion's whelp, a rampant young lion. He shall leap from Bashan. The graphic to your left is a silver coin struck by the Celts in Hungary in the 2nd century BC, and it shows the emblem of the horse. As each tribe camped around the tabernacle around 1400 BC, they gathered under 4 main brigade emblems: Judah in the east, Reuben the south, Ephraim the west, and Dan to the north. In a vision applicable to God's kingdom, both Ezekiel and John described the 4 living creatures that supported the throne. They were the man, lion, ox, and eagle, which also represented the brigade emblems encompassing the tabernacle. And of course, keep all of this in context because this is Israel. This is a picture of Israel. You read about the lion, the man, the ox, and the eagle, you're being told you're viewing Israel. Reuben was identified with the man, Judah the lion, Ephraim the ox, and Dan the eagle. The completion of the camp was established with 2 other tribes camped under these emblems also. It is satisfactory to say that Dan has 5 emblems associated with its tribe: the horse, serpent, lion's whelp, scales, and the eagle. Each of these devices will enable the seeker of Elohim's truth to identify Dan in these last days. In Psalm 68:15, especially since it records that in Deuteronomy 33 verse 22, in the middle of the page where it said, Dan is a lion's whelp, a rampant young lion, he shall leap from Bashan. And then in Psalm 68:15, we read, a mountain of Elohim is the mountain of Bashan. A mountain of peaks is the mountain of Bashan. O mountain of peaks, why do you gaze in envy at the mountain which Elohim desired to dwell in? Yahweh even dwells there forever. The chariots of Elohim are 20,000, thousands of thousands. Yahweh came from Sinai into the set apart place. You have ascended on high. You have led captivity captive. You have received gifts among men, and even the rebellious, that Yah Elohim might dwell there. In Numbers 10:25, when the encampments would move out in the wilderness, it was done in a very orderly fashion. It was the lead banner of Dan, the eagle, that represented the last 3 tribes of Israel that were last to move out. That's recorded in Numbers 10:25. Then the banner of the camp of the children of Dan, which formed the rear guard of all the camps. That's an important position right there. The rear guard of all the camps departed according to their divisions, and over their army was Ahiezer, son of Ammishaddai. Ahiezer means brother of help. Ammishaddai, people of the Almighty. Elohim is also known as our rear guard. In Isaiah 52:12, for you shall not come out in haste, nor go in flight. For Yahweh is going before you. He's got our front covered. He goes out before us. And the Elohim of Israel is also our rear guard. He protects our backs. So in the fact that Elohim is also our rear guard is in that same position as the last quadrant of tribes would lead out. The last quadrant behind the lead banner of Dan, the eagle. Adam Clark wrote, Dan shall judge. Dan, whose name signifies judgment, was the eldest of Jacob's sons by Bilhah, Rachel's maid, and he is here promised an equal rule with those tribes that sprang from either Leah or Rachel, the legal wives of Jacob. Some Jewish and some Christian writers understand this prophecy of Samson, who sprang from this tribe and judged, or as the word might be translated, avenged the people of Israel 20 years. And we know most of Yahweh's prophecy have three fulfillment. Gad, a raiding band raids him, but he raids its heel. Bread from Asher is rich, and he gives delicacies of a sovereign. Those two came through Zilpah, Leah's servant. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He gives words of elegance. Joseph is an offshoot of a fruit-bearing tree, an offshoot of a fruit-bearing tree by a fountain. His branches run over a wall, and the archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength. And this could also be viewed as his covenant remained in strength. And the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. From the El of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the heavens from above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors up to the limit of the everlasting hills. They are on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him who was separated from his brothers. So it is interesting where we read in verse 25, from the El of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty. I thought it was interesting that in that verse we just read in Numbers 10:25, that those over their army, the encampment behind the banner of Dan, were Ahiezer, meaning brother of help, and Ammishaddad, people of the Almighty. And then we read in verse 25, from the El of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty. And we just read that El is our rear guard. And in the wilderness encampments, the quadrant of Dan were the Israelites' rear guard. Benjamin is a wolf that tears. In the morning, he eats prey, and at night, he divides the spoil. So Benjamin, of course, was the youngest, and Benjamin was the youngest son of Rachel. We are all familiar with a well-known Benjamite, and that was the Apostle Paul, also known as Saul from Tarsus. As foretold by Jacob Israel, Benjamin is a wolf that tears. In the morning, he eats prey, and at night, he divides the spoil. So if we apply this prophetic word over Benjamin and proclamation over Benjamin, then this is how we can identify through people's actions who actually, what tribe they may be associated with. Because in Paul's early or mourning zealous years, he records he was circumcised the 8th day, of the race of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, according to Torah, a Pharisee, according to zeal, persecuting the assembly, according to righteousness that is in the law, having become blameless. I mean, he was a wolf. He was zealous. He turned out to be very vicious in his early zealous years. And he admits it. He lays it all out there. And then in Paul's latter years, or we can say his night years, he fed YHWH's sheep. He goes on to say in Philippians, but what might have been a gain to me, I have counted as loss because of Messiah. What is more, I even count all to be lost because of the excellence of the knowledge of Messiah, Yahushua, my master, for whom I have suffered the loss of all, and count them as refuse in order to gain Messiah and be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is of the law, book of the law, but that which is through faith in Messiah, the righteousness which is from Elohim on the basis of belief, to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, if somehow I might attain to the resurrection from the dead. So here we're reading about Paul, and Paul was an ethnic descendant of Israel, but he too came to understand that it was by faith that you enter into the true Israel born from above. He was a Benjamite. Now, Benjamin was the smallest and weakest of the 12 tribes of Israel. This was due to a war Benjamin fought against the other 11 tribes, in which Benjamin was virtually annihilated. I mean, that in itself would be a great study to review in Judges chapter 19 through 21. And if you haven't read that lately, I would recommend going back and reading Judges 19 to 21. I mean, the tribe of Benjamin was standing against all 11 tribes. Benjamin never quite recovered this crushing blow, but at first it seemed like Benjamin was kind of conquering, but ultimately he loses. The tribe loses. Benjamin never quite recovered this crushing blow, even though it furnished the second judge Ehud and the first king Saul to Israel, and was advantageously situated and was often honored by the residents of Samuel. It became a mere satellite to the more powerful tribe of Judah. Perhaps in the close association with its powerful neighbor, Judah, we see in part the fulfillment of the blessing in Deuteronomy 33:12. Of Benjamin, he said, let the beloved of YHWH dwell in safety by him, shielding him all the day as he dwells between his shoulders. So the territory of Benjamin was part of Jerusalem. At the end of Genesis 49, Jacob Israel dies, and this is speaking of Machpelah. And we're going to visit this area, Machpelah, here shortly. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field purchased, and the cave which is in it, from the sons of Heth. And when Jacob ended commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. In Genesis 50, we read of the grand funeral procession of Jacob Israel. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father as he made you swear. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. and all the house of Joseph and his brothers and his father's house. Only their little ones and their flock and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they lamented there with a great and very heavy lamentation. And he performed 7 days of mourning for his father. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning for the Mitzrites, the Egyptians. That is why its name was called Avel Mitzrayim, which is beyond the Jordan, referring to the grievous mourning. And his sons did to him as he had commanded them. For his sons brought him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial site. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers and all who went up with him to bury his father. So in verse 10, it says, they came to the threshing floor of Atad beyond the Jordan. At that point, there had to be a crossing over the Jordan. However, even that point is under debate, but this is how I see the scriptures conveying that it was possibly crossed over. Atad means thorns, and my mind went to the thorns placed on Yahusha's head. See, Atad means from an unused root, probably meaning to pierce or make fast. A thorn tree, Atad, bramble, thorn. We equate a threshing floor as a place where the chaff would be separated from the grain by the process of going through a forming instrument called a tribulum. The English word tribulation is derived from the Latin word tribulum. This was a place of great grief, and Joseph performed 7 days of mourning. Those observing this great procession even changed the name of the place to Abel Mitzrayim, referring to their great mourning. After the funeral of Jacob, Israel, the sons are now fearful of vengeance. Yeah, they were worried. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph hates us and pays us back all the evil which we did to him? Because probably they were thinking that's what they would do. And they sent word to Joseph saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, this is what you are to say to Joseph. I beg you, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the Elohim of your father. You know, you kind of wonder if the sons didn't have a special meeting with their father Israel to make sure they got that statement from him before his death. And after hearing that, we continue to read. It says, and Joseph wept when they spoke to him, and his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, see, we are your servants. And Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of Elohim? And you intended evil against me, but Elohim intended it for good, in order to do it as it is this day, to keep a great many people alive. And now do not fear, I provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Now, what was interesting in doing a little research, I came across the account in the book of Yashar. Now, I really hardly ever go into extra biblical text, but the possibilities of this grand procession, it was rather interesting, some of the things that were noted. Now, of course, this is not included in the canon of scriptures that we have today. It said, and after the days of his weeping had passed, at the end of 70 days, Joseph said to Pharaoh, I will go up and bury my father in the land of Canaan, as he made me swear, and then I will return. And Pharaoh sent Joseph, saying, go up and bury your father, as he said, and as he made you swear. And Joseph rose up with all his brothers to go to the land of Canaan to bury their father, Jacob, as he had commanded them. And Pharaoh commanded that it should be proclaimed throughout Egypt, saying, whoever goes not up with Joseph and his brothers to the land of Canaan to bury Jacob shall die. And all Egypt heard of Pharaoh's proclamation, and they all rose up together, and all the servants of Pharaoh, and the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt went up with Joseph, and all the officers and nobles of Pharaoh went up as the servants of Joseph, and they went to bury Jacob in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Jacob carried the bier, or the coffin, if you will, on which he lay, according to all that their father commanded them. So did his sons to him. And the bier was of pure gold, and it was inlaid round about with onyx stones and bdellium. And the covering of the bier was gold woven work, joined with threads, and over them were hooks of onyx stones and bdellium. And Joseph placed on the head of his father Jacob a large golden crown, and he put a golden scepter in his hand, and they surrounded the bier, as was the custom of kings during their lives. And all the troops of Egypt went before him in this array. At first, all the mighty men of Pharaoh and the mighty men of Joseph, and after them the rest of the inhabitants of Egypt. And they were all girded with swords and equipped with coats of mail, and the trappings of war were on them. And all the weepers and mourners went at a distance opposite to the bier, going and weeping and lamenting, and the rest of the people went after the bier. And Joseph and his household went together near the bier, barefooted and weeping. And the rest of Joseph's servants went around him. Each man had his ornaments on him, and they were all armed with their weapons of war. And 50 of Jacob's servants went in front of the bier, and they strewed along the road myrrh and aloes and all manner of perfume. And all the sons of Jacob that carried the bier walked on the perfumery, and the servants of Jacob went before them, strewing the perfume along the road. And Joseph went up with a heavy camp, and they did after this manner every day until they reached the land of Canaan. Now, as I understand, it was at least 300 miles. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which was on the other side of Jordan, and they mourned an exceeding great and heavy mourning in that place. And all the kings of Canaan heard of this thing, and they all went forth, each man from his house, 31 kings of Canaan, and they all came with their men to mourn and weep over Jacob. And all these kings beheld Jacob's bier, and behold, Jacob's crown was on it. And they also put their crowns on the bier and encircled it with crowns. And all these kings made in that place a great and heavy mourning with the sons of Jacob and Egypt over Jacob, for all the kings of Canaan knew the valor of Jacob and his sons. And the report reached Esau, saying, Jacob died in Egypt, and his sons in all Egypt are conveying him to the land of Canaan to bury him. And Esau heard this thing, and he was dwelling in Mount Seir. And he rose up with his sons and all his people and all his household, a people exceedingly great. And they came to mourn and weep over Jacob. And it came to pass when Esau came, he mourned for his brother Jacob, and all Egypt and all Canaan again rose up and mourned a great mourning with Esau over Jacob in that place. And Joseph and his brothers brought their father Jacob from that place, and they went to Hebron to bury Jacob in the cave by his fathers. And they came to Kirith Arba, to the cave. And as they came, Esau stood with his sons against Joseph and his brothers as an hindrance in the cave, saying, Jacob shall not be buried therein, for it belongs to us and to our father. Again, the two nations warring in Rebekah's womb to this very day is the battle between Esau and Jacob. It continues in our day. It is viewed also in the book of Revelation, this war between Esau and Jacob. Esau's color is red, blood red, but Esau is Jacob's brother. And they too, if they repent and believe in Yahushua HaMashiach, have an opportunity to become part of Israel born from above. So this war will go on until the end of days, until the King of Kings comes, Yahushua HaMashiach. Verse 51, and Joseph and his brothers heard the words of Esau's sons, and they were exceedingly wroth. And Joseph approached to Esau, saying, what is this thing which they have spoken? Surely my father Jacob bought it from you for great riches after the death of Isaac, now 25 years ago, and also all the land of Canaan he bought from you and from your sons and your seed after you. And Jacob bought it for his sons and his seed after him for an inheritance forever. And why speak you these things this day? I mean, we can't forget that crossing over principle occurred between Esau and Jacob. We know Esau was the firstborn, but Jacob received the birthright and the blessing. Verse 53, and Esau answered, saying, you speak falsely and utter lies. For I sold not anything belonging to me in all this land, as you say, neither did my brother Jacob buy anything belonging to me in this land. And Esau spoke these things in order to deceive Joseph with his words. For Esau knew that Joseph was not present in those days when Esau sold all belonging to him in the land of Canaan to Jacob. And Joseph said to Esau, surely my father inserted these things with you in the record of purchase, and testified the record with witnesses. And behold, it is with us in Egypt. And Esau answered, saying to him, bring the record. All that you will find in the record, so will we do. Of course, the record is in Egypt, 300 miles away. And Joseph called to Naphtali. So I reinserted the verse in chapter 49, verse 21. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He gives words of elegance. Joseph called to Naphtali, his brother, and he said, hasten quickly, stay not, and run, I pray you, to Egypt, and bring all the records of the purchase, the sealed record, and the open record, and also all the first records in which all the transactions of the birthright are written. Fetch you. Again, the battle over the birthright, the battle over the kingdom. And you shall bring them to us here, that we may know from them all the words of Esau and his sons, which they spoke this day. And Naphtali listened to the voice of Joseph, and he hurried and ran to go down to Egypt. And Naphtali was lighter on foot than any of the stags that were on the wilderness, for he would go on ears of corn without crushing them. And when Esau saw that Naphtali had gone to fetch the records, he and his sons increased their resistance against the cave, and Esau and all his people rose up against Joseph and his brothers to battle. And all the sons of Jacob and the people of Egypt fought with Esau and his men. And the sons of Esau and his people were smitten before the sons of Jacob. And the sons of Jacob slew of Esau's people 40 men. And Cushim, the son of Dan, the son of Jacob, was at that time with Jacob's sons, but he was about 100 cubits distant from the place of battle, for he remained with the children of Jacob's sons by Jacob's bier to guard it. And Cushim was dumb and deaf. Still, he understood the voice of consternation among the men. And he asked, saying, why do you not bury the dead? And what is this great consternation? And they answered him the words of Esau and his sons. And he ran to Esau in the midst of the battle, and he slew Esau with a sword. And he cut off his head, and it sprang to a distance, and Esau fell among the people of the battle. And when Cushim did this thing, the sons of Jacob prevailed over the sons of Esau. And the sons of Jacob buried their father Jacob by force in the cave, and the sons of Esau beheld it. And Jacob was buried in Hebron, in the cave of Machpelah, which Abraham had bought from the sons of Heth for the possession of a burial place, and he was buried in very costly garments. And no king had such honor paid him as Joseph paid to his father at his death, for he buried him with great honor, like to the burial of kings. And Joseph and his brothers made a mourning of 7 days for their father. At the close of Genesis 50, we also see the death of Joseph. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household. And Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were also born on Joseph's knees. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am dying, but Elohim shall certainly visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the children of Israel swear, saying, Elohim shall certainly visit you, and you shall bring up my bones from here. And Joseph died, being 110 years old. And they embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Mitzrayim, Egypt. Today, we still have 2 houses declaring their own kingdoms and their own king, but only one possesses the living king and the other the false king. Each person must decide which priesthood they are tied to and to what altar do they go. Each person must choose and prayerfully choose wisely. We go to Yahusha's altar, who is the true vine, outside the gate. We are Israel. We are the temple of his Ruach HaKodesh. So this concludes the Torah portion, Vayechi, he lived, and also the accounts recorded in the book of Genesis. So next week, we will begin the book of Exodus, Shemot, which means names. So until then, thanks for joining the study, and Shabbat Shalom to all.